form. It is said that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. With this thought, I, Ruby Krishnan, welcome you all to this day 2 of AICT Training and Learning Academy sponsored e-faculty development program on Design Thinking Principle in Pharma Product Development, a fresh look towards innovation, organized by Anand Pharmacy College, Anand. Today, we are having sessions of three eminent speakers, Dr. Devjani Singh, Vice President F&D, Zydus Cadila Healthcare Limited, Ahmedabad, Professor Dr. Bhavin Kothari, Discipline Faculty, Strategic Design Management, National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, and Dr. Ketan Patel, Assistant Professor, College of Pharmacy and Health Science, St. John's University, New York, USA, to deliver an address over the theme of EFDP. Before we proceed any further, announcement for all the participants. It is mandatory to fill up the attendance link which is given at the end of this session. 80% attendance is mandatory to get the certificate, and if you have any queries regarding or if you want to raise any questions, then information has been passed on to you that you can type down your questions to that given number and that will be forwarded to the speakers. Now, without any further ado, let's hop on to the knowledge tour with our very first speaker of the day, Dr. Devjani Singh. For the same, I request Dr. Tejal Gandhi ma'am to introduce our speaker and invite her to deliver the session. Please, ma'am.
Very good morning to one and all. I again welcome each and every delegate and my students and faculty members on second day of our EFDP. And it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Devjani Singh. She has been associated with pharmaceutical industry since 1996. Dr. Singh holds wide experience in parenteral dosage forms specifically for the US and other regulatory markets, ranging from complex injectables, combination products, PFS, cartridge, auto-injector, and pen device based, onco-injectables, protein peptides based products, and lyophilized products. She has to her credit more than 80 ANDA approvals of injectable products, most of which has been commercialized successfully in US market. She is academically also extremely sound, and she did her bachelor's and she was gold medalist from College of Pharmaceutical Science, Manipal, and IIT BHU. She is currently working as Vice President, Parenteral Dosage Forms, Zydus Healthcare Limited. With this brief introduction, I would like to welcome Dr. Devjani Singh for this first session of second day EFDP, and she will brief us on this for next 1.5 hours. The title of her topic is Strategic Role of Formulation Development in Generic Pharma Industry. Madam, I would like to welcome you, and the session is with you. Please, ma'am. Madam, please, can you unmute your mic? We are not able to hear you. Dr. Singh?
Unmute. Unmute here, but just see where you can hear. Okay.
Madam, now
Hello?
we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, we are able to hear you. Dr. Singh, we are able to hear you.
Actually, there is some technical glitch. I think I'm not able to hear what's being said, but I don't know whether you can hear me properly.
Yeah, we are able to hear you, and I have introduced you, ma'am, to all delegates. And can we start?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's any type of question, just give call in mobile, because otherwise I won't be able to hear properly. Okay. So I'll just start. Yeah. Okay. Well, so good morning, everybody. And I start with the presentation, strategic role of formulation development in generic pharma industry. So I think all of you are aware what's a generic industry. So it is actually, a generic industry means it's the copy of the innovator product, because innovators are very expensive medicines, and therefore in order to, it's in a simple language, we say that if you want to reach to the masses, so you have to come out with medications that are reasonably cost effective, but they have to be equally safe and efficacious. So that's how the generic pharma industry has come up. And today's topic, this is the strategic role of the formulation development, how they are playing a role for the generic pharma industry. So a normal disclaimer: no part of this presentation may be reproduced, quoted, or circulated without prior written approval from Cadila Healthcare, and the views and opinions expressed in the PowerPoint slides are those of my individual presenter and should not be construed to represent FDA's views or policies. So I take you through this agenda. I'll give an overview of ANDA applications, and basically my presentation will be focusing more on the injectable dosage form and the formulation development requisites, overview of the quality by design and the risk-based concepts and principles, followed by ICH Q8, Q9 and Q10 guidances, and finally the question answer session. So because I'm not able to hear anybody, I think I can take all, and it's difficult for me to actually understand, and I think you all are able to hear me properly. In case you are not able to hear me, I think Dr. Hardik can just give me a call in my mobile. So the generic drug approval. Just coming to a glimpse and summary of how it all began. So in 1970, so FDA had established the ANDA mechanism. ANDA is the abbreviated new drug application, as a mechanism for the review and approval of the generic versions of the medications. So before 1978, so all the generic product applicants were required to submit the complete safety and efficacy through all the clinical trial programs. However, post 1978, the applicants were required to submit published reports, whichever is available in the domain. So all those reports could have been submitted to prove the safety and efficacy of the product. However, neither of these approaches were considered satisfactory, because it's all time consuming and we were reinventing the same wheel again and again. So we originated the Hatch-Waxman Act in 1984. So if I tell you what is the difference between the innovator and a generic product, so here are listed all the parameters. You can see here the innovator drug product versus the generic drug product. So we have the same active ingredient in case of both innovator and the generic product, same safety and efficacy in case of innovator and generic product, quality and strength remains same in both the cases, performance and standards remain same. So the difference here is cost. So in case of innovator, it is highly expensive, whereas in generic product, it is a very economic medication. So FDA inspection of our manufacturing facilities, so even the innovator has to go through the FDA audits, and so is the generic manufacturer. FDA reviews and reports of adverse reactions, yes, in both cases it is required. FDA reviews for the labeling, yes, in case of the innovator product, because they are a new chemical entity. However, in case of generic, we are just copying the innovator, and therefore this is not required. Extensive research and development investments are required in case of the innovator product because it's a new chemical entity. So you have to go through, like the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. So it is very expensive and time consuming. Whereas in case of generic product, this is not required. This is waived off. Expensive marketing and advertising, yes, of course, for the new chemical entity, you need to publish, you have to provide awareness to the common public about the medication, and therefore it is very expensive to advertise and market it. Whereas in generic product, you are following the same as the innovator. So whatever is the safety and efficacy and the indications are same in case of the generic product. Patent protection, yes, of course, in innovator product, because they are spending so much for the innovator product, they are taking almost more than 15-20 years to come out with a new chemical entity. So naturally they have to protect their innovation, and therefore they come out with all the patents, and therefore any generic product cannot be launched before the patent is expired. So this is for the generic product, you do not have a patent protection. For FDA review to show active ingredient is equivalent to original, it is not applicable in innovator product. However, for the generic product, yes, you have to prove that you are same as the reference listed drug. The drug product development timeline in case of innovator, as I said, is almost average of 12 years, 12 to 15 years. Whereas for the generic drug product to be approved, we take usually 2 to 4 years of time, unless and until it is a very complex product. So I go to the next slide. So what is the indispensability ground for the generic products? So the generic product, it contains the same active ingredients as the innovator product. The inactive ingredients might slightly vary. There are many, conditions in which case they can vary. It must be identical in strength, dosage form, route of administration. You must have the same use and indications. It has to be bioequivalent and must have same batch requirements for identity, safety, and purity. And you also have to follow a strict standard of FDA good manufacturing practices. So that's the requirement and of the generic products in short. So now when I talk about the ANDA applications, so there are different types of clauses through which we can submit our application to the agency. So there is a paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and paragraph 4. So these are the 4 clauses through which you can actually file your generic product as an ANDA application. So what does para 1 say? So as I said that all the innovator products are protected by their specific patents. But we also find there are certain products which are very old innovator products that do not, those are not protected or covered by any type of patent. So all of them are categorized as paragraph 1. And if you want to file an ANDA for those type of medicines which do not have a patent covered till date, so FDA would approve a generics immediately. And one or more applicants may enter into this scenario. Same is para, now we come to para 2. So here the category is the patent of the innovator has already expired. So ANDA holder can immediately come with their filing and the generic product can be approved by FDA. In this case also you can have more than one applicants entering this scenario. Now going to para 3 and para 4. So para 3 is the patent of the innovator has still not expired and it will expire on a specific date. So you know when the patents are expiring and therefore you can work on your ANDA, you can work, develop your generic product and you can submit it, and FDA will review your file and they will come out with a tentative approval, or you will get the approval once the patent is expired. So this is called para 3 filing. What is para 4 filing? So this is little bit difficult. Para 4 is you are considering that the patent which already exists for the innovator, so you are trying to say that the patent is invalid or it is non-infringing by the generic applicant. So you can have your own new process or your own new methods to actually submit this file, and you can have your own patents for this, and you can also say that your the innovator's patent is invalid and it is non-infringing to you. And generic applicant file will send a notice to the patent holder for this, and this is a long process altogether for a para 4 filing. So I will go specifically in the para 4 systems now. So if I now talk about what is the ANDA review process. So first, as an applicant, the applicant holder will first file the ANDA. So after the ANDA is filed, the process says that we would be receiving either an acceptable and complete information letter from FDA back to us, or they would refuse to receive and issue a letter that they give us an RTR. We call it an RTR or RTF, refuse to file, because of so and so reasons. So FDA has a checklist against which they actually check whether the file what we have submitted is complete or incomplete. If we get a RTF, then we have to again check what are the clauses because of which we have got the RTF or RTR. So we need to again re-amend our file and again submit it with a new filing fees. There's a 25% or something reduction of the filing fees which happens for this, and then you can resubmit it. So now if the ANDA is accepted by the agency, the review process begins. So in the review process, we have totally 2 or 3 main sections. So one is the BE, that's the bioequivalence review process, that's the BE review, and the other portion is the CMC review, that's called chemistry and micro review. So that's the major part where the entire review of the file takes place. So meanwhile, while doing the review, FDA might also send us a request for the plant inspection. So the plant inspection usually happens when the plant is new or the line is new from where a new generic product has been filed. It may not happen, the audits may not happen if the plant is already approved or the line is already approved. So it depends on FDA's, it is FDA's viewpoint whether to have or have an audit or not for the manufacturing facility. And then comes the labeling review. So based on the labeling portion, then we get a review letter. So when all these reviews are done, so FDA will send a separate letter if the BE review is acceptable to us. So if the BE is acceptable, so we there are no deficiency points, then we get a no deficiency letter for BE, no concerns for the BE. However, if there is some concern, then we get a BE deficiency letter. So once deficiency letter is received, we have to see what all queries have come, and then we have to respond them and justify them appropriately, and again resubmit the queries. Same is the case for the CMC and labeling review. In case of CMC, whatever queries we start getting, there are various means and ways of how FDA sends us the queries. So they can be called CRL, they can be called IR, so they can be telephonic deficiency. So there are many processes and ways by which we get the review, the query letters from the agency, and we need to respond them appropriately. There are time limits for that. In some cases, it can be a minor response query. In some cases, it can be a major query. If it is a major query, then the goal date, that's the, goal date which we get for the approval of the generic product can be shifted if we get a major deficiency. So once all these queries are appropriately justified and answered, then FDA will again go back and review all of them and then give us a final approval letter. And this approval letter means that our ANDA is approved, and we can now finally go ahead with the commercial launch. And in case we get a tentative approval, that means that it might have some patent indications in that, and once the patent is expired, we can go ahead with the launch of the product. So this is all about the entire ANDA review process. So as I said that the entire review process takes, variable, the product to product, there are variable time limits for getting this approval. In case of highly complex products, the time review time may be very long, because we keep on getting deficiencies, and we keep on responding to the deficiencies, and unless and until the everything is justified, we do not get a approval for the final product. So this is the entire review process. Now I go to the generic process development cycle. So what we do in the industry. So basically the entire development life cycle, that's the full service development, has 4 stages, and in most of the companies it's almost same. There might be small changes here and there, but the basic skeleton remains same for all the companies. So we have an initiation phase. So first is the initiation of the project, then the preparation phase, the execution phase, and finally the completion phase. So what do we see in the initiation phase? So the project is selected first, and there would be some business rationale to select that product. So the business team works for that. So why the project gets selected, and then there would be IP evaluation. So what type of filing has to be done, whether it should be a para 1, para 2, para 3, or para 4 filing, or there are any other IP constraints to come out with the generic filing. So all this evaluation is done. It can be, this IP evaluation can be for the API as well as a finished product. So once that is done, then we develop a formulation strategy based on the type of filing which is required and the regulatory pathway. So this few things come in the initiation phase. Once that is done, we go to the preparation phase. So in the preparatory phase, we have the communications done with various cross-functional teams. We start the sourcing. The sourcing is a very important step here, because we need to source various things like the API, the active ingredient, the excipients. If there are any complex excipients that need to be sourced properly, and then the packaging material sourcing, which is very important for all the dosage forms. Then the tooling development are required to develop this product. Then we do the budgeting, that how much budget is required to take up to go through this project, and finally the project chartering is done. The next phase is the execution phase. So once all this is completed, we now start our lab scale trials. So we start with the pre-formulation. So pre-formulation is all type of compatibility studies which we need to do with the API as well as the excipients as well as the primary packaging material. So with all, we come out with a final formulation that these are the excipients which are compatible with the API and the final packaging material. So we initiate the lab scale trials, we charge them in stability, and we generate few lab scale stability data. And then once the lab scale stability data is generated, we do a prototype finalization, a stability assessment is done. Then we go for the scaling up of the batch. So because our commercial batch would be much higher in scale, so we have to see that the product behaves the same way when we scale it up. So there's a scaling up phase. Meanwhile, we do the analytical method validations. The pilot and the exhibit manufacturing is done. The pivotal B study or the clinical trials, whatever is required, would be completed in this execution phase. Once this is done, the next stage comes is the completion phase. So what we do here? So here we try to tech transfer. Technology transfer is done. So there, in some companies, there is a separate team who does the tech transfer. In some companies, it's the same formulation development team who does the technology transfer to the shop floor. So there's the technology transfer, which is done with all type of documentation that is required to take the project to the final stage. These batches which are taken in the final scale are also sometimes called the process validation batches. In some cases, we complete the activity with a completion of the process validation. And with this, we finally compile our dossier, which is ready for submission to the agency. So once the dossier is submitted, then we start getting the deficiency letters from the agency. So we start responding to the deficiency letters. Once the deficiency letters are responded adequately, then we get the final approval. And once the approval comes, we can launch our product. And then F&D also supports for the post-launch of the product, because there are many issues sometimes which comes up for almost in day-to-day dealings of the commercial aspects. So naturally, F&D has to support for all those post-launch batches. So this is the entire development life cycle. So now I go to the next slide. This is called the development team metrics. So how does this R&D work? So for any generic product development, it's almost like the new chemical entity or the innovator, the way the innovator products are developed. So all of us have various departments which are doing their own job. So if I start with the first one is a formulation development department, then is the analytical development department, then the IPR cell, that's the IP evaluation which is happening every stage of our development, the packaging development cell, then the purchase and the supply chain. So for all sourcing purposes, all the API sourcing and everything, we require the purchase and the supply chain to be fully active for the projects. We have the pilot manufacturing and the quality assurance segment, which every day in day out they are doing all the evaluations and quality analysis for the developed products. We have a technology transfer team. And finally, once everything is done, comes the regulatory affairs, who are from the initial stage itself. They give us a guidance how what's the regulatory pathway for this project. And then once a filing is done, then all the queries which comes through the regulatory affairs team, and then they discuss with all the other departments how to address those deficiencies, and finally they get submitted to the agency. There's a separate stability team to take care of all the exhibit batch stabilities, stability section, and finally a project management team who also takes care or takes charge of driving this project within a committed timelines. And there is also one more team, which is the pharmacokinetics team. So in case of any type of the BE studies or the clinical trials, so this is a department which plays a pivotal role for doing all these studies. So this is all about the R&D metrics. So as I said earlier, that my presentation will be focused towards the injectable dosage form. So let me give you an overview of the evolution of the injectables. So as you all know that injectable dosage forms are slightly different from the other dosage forms that I'll take in the next slide, why they are different. So just to give you an overview, so in the early 2000, like 2001, 2002, if you talk about the ANDA submission, so I think in the very beginning of 2000, we started mostly with the conventional injectables. So we club it as group 1. So the conventional injectables, which are all monophasic systems, like it may be aqueous based systems or the non-aqueous based systems. And then there are multiphasic systems. They can be suspensions, emulsions, or micellar type of systems which were filed. That's all coming in under the basket of conventional injectables. From there, in the next stage, like in around 2008 to 2010, we slightly moved towards the complex injectables. So what are these complex injectables? So they are all carrier-based projects. They are like microspheres or liposomes or the nanoparticles. There can be implants, there can be device-based products, and lately, if you know, there are many, peptide-based projects which are all covered under the peptides and proteins, all covered under the complex injectables. And even the biologicals, which are of the new generation biologicals, so they are all come under this complex injectables. And from there on, we are now moving to the next stage. That's the next generation injectables, which are targeted delivery systems and the intelligent devices. So these intelligent devices will remind the patient of when to take the next medication. So they are smart devices. So smart device-based systems. So this is all about the overview of the injectable dosage form. So I go to the next stage. So next slide is about the sterile products. So what are sterile products? So injectables are actually sterile products because you are administering this dosage form directly inside the blood, and it directly crosses your blood-brain barrier. So this is the reason why the sterile products have to be to be taken care differently. So they have to be sterile. It cannot be partial. It cannot be little sterile. So it has to be sterile. So how do you prove its sterility? So there is a complete section of sterility assurance segment. So it's like you must be knowing that or you must be hearing that most of the cases in recently the FDA has come out with various deficiencies, or they have issued many 483s, what we call, for the manufacturing facilities, and many of the manufacturing facilities have been closed because the sterility assurance section has not been properly done, or it is not as per the requirement of the agency. So you have to have quite a huge amount of expenses to maintain your sterile manufacturing facility. So it is not easy to handle a sterile product. So you have quite a huge amount of investment going into maintaining a sterile facility. So the sterile products, as I said, the sterile products, they are injection or infusion products. So there can be the IV infusion bags. As you know, there can be saline bags, there can be dextrose, or there can be other type of bags, which is other type of solution-based products. Then there can be preservative-free solution, all conventional dosage forms, and there can be lyophilized injection. So this is all about the injection and infusion. Now we come to the complicated product list. So these are depot injections. They can be suspensions, they can be emulsions, they can be depots, like delayed release type of products. And then can be we can have the liposomal products, the nanoparticles, the emulsion based projects, and the suspension products. And for the device based, what most of the companies right now are doing are auto injector, that is for the self administration. So many of you are probably are aware of the insulin based insulin injections. So in many cases nowadays, most of the injections are coming as auto injector projects, because they can be self administered. The PFS, that's the pre-filled syringes, they already the medication is filled into a syringe, and it can be directly administered by the patient himself or herself, or it can be given by the hospital authorities. Then there are pain-based projects. It's like a pen, which can the medication is inside a pen like device, and you can every day, if you need to give one shot, you have to take one shot of the injection. So the pens can have multiple dosages which can be delivered from a single pen. So these are pen-based projects. So these are also are the latest type of developments which are happening now. And the infusion pumps, so they are also delivered with respect to the dosage delivery, which is being in a highly mechanized form. So these are called infusion pumps. So these all are called as combination products. Why they are called combination products? Because here you are combining a delivery device along with your actual injectable dose. So therefore FDA has nomenclatured it as a combination product. So if you see the injectable market growth, if you see the green portion, so the entire subcontinent and the Asian market, the Australian market, there's a high demand of injectables now. So the entire space is now expanding for the injectable dosage form. And if you see the side of America and Europe, they are now almost in the mid growth of the injectable dosage form. whereas in Africa and South America, the growth is still a little less, and we believe that these markets will soon pick up for the injectable dosage forms. Now, let me go through the actual development flowchart. So as I said that the skeleton remains almost same for every company. However, there might be certain differences. So this is what we are following in our company, and 99% things remain same for all the dosage forms. And being because I am focusing now mostly on the injectable, so here the flowchart which I show you is for the injectable dosage form. So as we start, the product is identified and we get a decision form to develop this project. And as soon as we get that, we prepare a product development plan. So once the plan is in place, we start with two main activities, that is the RLD characterization. So which RLD we are actually copying. RLD means the reference listed drug or the innovator product. So we have to procure the RLD and we have to start characterizing the RLD. And the other portion, simultaneous activity which we do is to identify the API source. So now after we start characterizing the RLD, we should start sourcing the API and start characterizing the API for us. So these are the two activities which go in parallel. So once that is done, once the RLD is characterized, we know which primary packaging material and excipients we need to select. So we also finalize the API on the other side. So once that is done, so the design development, the design of experiments and all those activities take shape. So we initiate all those activities here. Now, when we have the API in hand and the RLD is already characterized, the analytical method development activities are initiated. And once that is done, we have the lab scale batches, prototype batches, which are ready for stability charging. So meanwhile, before we go for the lab scale batches, there are list of studies which we need to conduct. So like the sequence of addition of the API, the pH suitability studies, hold time studies, the autoclaving suitability. Hold time means like why we need to do hold time studies, because once we go to the manufacturing plant, so there are cases or there are chances that there can be breakdown of the machine anytime. So sometimes the bulk or the product which we are manufacturing, the generic product, one bulk may be very expensive. Like it may be around 2 to 4 5 crores of rupees, one common bulk of the product. So if you don't establish a hold time for these type of products, you have to throw it in the gutter. So to avoid that, we develop a hold time study. Like you can establish that your bulk can be kept properly in qualitatively complying to your specification for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. So whatever way you want, you can develop a hold time study. Then the autoclaving suitability. So there are various, all the injectable products, they have to be sterile, as I said. So you have different types of methods to make them sterile. So it can be done by autoclaving, or it can be done by simple filtration processes. So you have to understand during your development, so which method you are choosing. So you have to establish your stability studies based on whatever method you are choosing. So autoclaving suitability is one of them. Preservative antioxidant effectiveness. So if you have a preservative in your product, so you have to prove that the preservative or the antioxidant is effective. Then the primary packaging material and the filters and tubing compatibility, because you must be aware that when we from the bulk, when it is transferred to the filling machine, the filling line, there are different types of tubings or different types of filling nozzles or which the product will come into contact with. So before you even do that, so we have to establish that your product is very, very compatible with the tubing or the contact parts which you are, the filter or the tubing or the contact parts which you are choosing. There are cases when your product may not be compatible with the stainless steel, so you have to you have to choose or prove that it is compatible in some other type of vessel, like probably a glass vessel or something. Same way, there are various types of filters which are available. So you have to understand which type of filter will be suitable for your purpose. Then there can be headspace optimization studies. So many of the products may not be, may degrade when there is oxygen inside the vial or inside your pre-filled syringe or inside your cartridge. So you have to control your headspace based on the requirement of your product. Then you have to also prove that your product is photostable, and in case it is photolabile, then you have to accordingly develop your packaging material, or you have to choose a type of amber vial, or you may have to choose a proper secondary packaging for that. So you need to do this type of studies. Then comes a filter validation. So filter validation, when your product is sterilized through filtration processes, you have to undergo filter validation process to prove that your product, your product is sterile. So you have a huge activity of confirming the filter validation studies. So once the lab scale stability batches are done, then comes the next stage of initiating the product in the manufacturing, to the manufacturing department. So you have to go with a new type of change control. This process may change from company to company. However, in our case, we go with a change control to initiate a new change in the system, that we are coming out with a new product. And then the analytical method validation and the specification finalization, the manufacturing flowchart preparation, so all are done by the formulation and the analytical development teams. So once that is done, then comes the evaluation and assessments of the validation requirements at the plant level. So there might be a cleaning validation which is required at the plant level. There can be a, the terminal sterilization, that is autoclaving validation requirement, which has to be done at the plant level in their equipments. So all those activities are initiated at the plant level. So once that is done, you are ready to take a scale-up batch, and which is or the optimization batch, or sometimes we call it as an engineering batch. So on the basis of this batch, you come out with all the critical process parameters, you optimize them, and finally you prepare your BMR, that record to go to the next stage of the exhibit batch execution. So you give a training to the department and or awareness to the people that this product, what's the background of the product, what's the behavior of the product, and you give a training to all the concerned people in the manufacturing department. Then we come out with the exhibit batch documents. Once that is issued, we are ready to execute the batch. And once that is done, then it is initiated in stability. And once the exhibit batch is in place, we redo the photostability, thermal cycling, dilution studies. Thermal cycling is one of the studies which we need to perform, because the product would be transferred from one country to another country. So naturally there will be different temperature excursions, or a range of temperature through which the product will go through. So you have to establish through your studies that your product is stable within so and so temperature. So therefore a thermal cycling study is required. In case of injectables, sometimes you might have seen that the the injectable product is mixed in a infusion bag and then delivered to the patient, or in some cases it is mixed with another injectable product and delivered to the patient. So in order to check that your product is compatible or with the other diluent which is being used, so you have to perform a dilution study, and this dilution study is done as per the pack insert, whatever is mentioned in the pack insert of the innovator product. So we have to establish all those compatibility studies or dilution studies exactly as per the pack insert. So this is about the conventional liquid product development. Same way, the lyophilized product, as you know, lyophilized, I'm not very sure whether you know about lyophilized products. So there are certain injectable products which are not stable in the liquid form, and therefore we have to convert it into the into the solid dosage form. So how we do that? So this technique is called the lyophilization technique. So there are 3 steps in that. So the liquid bulk is prepared, then they are filled in the vials. The vials are half stoppered, and then they are put in a machine called the lyophilizer machine, lyophilizer. And there are 3 steps in this. So first, the liquid inside the vials are frozen. So you call the freezing stage. After that, we put after the freezing stage is over, then we go to the next stage, which is called the primary drying stage. So you start applying some vacuum to the product, so that the liquid which is there inside the frozen mass, that is pulled out through the vacuum. So there's a balance of the pressure and vacuum inside the lyophilizer, and the vacuum is through the vacuum the moisture is pulled out. And then the third stage is the secondary drying stage. That's the final stage of the product, wherein the final moisture which is still remaining will be pulled out through that secondary drying stage, and finally your product will be totally in the dry powder cake form. So this cake is very stable, and once this is through, the lyophilized cake comes out, then you have to dilute it with the solvent or the diluent which is mentioned in the pack insert, and then it can be injected to the patient. Now, such lyophilized products, usually the lyophilization cycle is a very longer cycle, and when you load it into the lyophilizer, usually the cycle varies from maybe 20-25 hours to even more than 90 hours, 100 hours, based on the type of the or the nature of the product. The lyophilization cycle would vary. So the only step here, if you see in the development flowchart, what I explained earlier in the conventional liquid injections, the only difference here is the lyo cycle development. So here you have to optimize the lyophilization cycle through your trials. So you have to see that your product is still cost effective, so you do not develop a very lengthy lyo cycle. Otherwise, your product will be much more sold in a much higher cost, because you have to bear the cost of that entire lyophilization cycle which happens in your manufacturing facility. So therefore, this is of prime importance. You have to optimize your lyo cycle. So this is the only change which you see from the entire development flow chart of the conventional products. So same way, we when you develop a complex injectable product, which may be a suspension, which may be an emulsion, or which may be a liposomal type of preparation. So here the development flow chart almost remains same. However, the process of development, the manufacturing process changes. In some cases, you may have to come out with a new manufacturing skid altogether in your facility. So they are all complex processes. In case of combination products, as I said, wherein the device, you have a device to be developed, so you have to development of a pen or an auto injector which goes pre-filled syringe which goes inside an auto injector, so that the patient can self-medicate them. So all these development activities are being done by the formulation development scientist. Now I go to the next slide. So once all these developments are done, the next stage is a technology transfer, as I said. So as F&D and as the analytical team or the packaging development team, we all complete the activities in our R&D, and then it is transferred through the technology transfer team to the plant scale, and where they do a part of their validation activities. The QA takes a fine manufacturing, and the QA team takes the pivotal role here to perform all the validation activities. And once the training, product presentation, and everything is completed, the new exhibit batch documents are ready. So the batch execution dates come in, and therefore the formulation development scientist and the technology transfer scientist goes to the manufacturing shop floor to execute the batch. So as per FDA's requirement, for every product, we have to take 3 exhibit batches. So for the same strength, same SKU, we have to manufacture 3 exhibit batches of same batch size, or the third batch can have a different batch size based on the guidance which is being provided by the FDA. And After that is done, we are ready with the compilation of the data. With a 6 month of stability data, we are ready for the dossier filing. Once the dossier is filed, again the same process. It's the the deficiency addressal takes place. Again, the activity starts for the formulation scientists, the analytical scientists, the packaging development scientists to address all the deficiencies. So based on that, the product is approved. And finally, once a product is approved, you are ready to take an engineering batch and the process validation batches. And finally, the process validation batches goes as commercial batches to the market. So this is all about the development of the injectable products, dosage forms. As I said that the basic structure remains same for all dosage forms. It's only the type of studies which may be different. So now, let me give you an overview of quality by design. So what is the, why we need to know about quality by design? So this is the latest concept of FDA. Quality by design, as you know that there have been occasions or various market recalls, market complaints, or FDA's recalls of various batches which has happened throughout from 2000 to 2020. If you see the entire FDA's, database, you can see that there are numerous of recalls which has happened for the generic products. So FDA as an agency, they started to think like, once the product is approved, why there are so many recalls, or why the generic product is not getting manufactured the way it is required, or why it is not being reproduced. So when they started thinking about this, they finally concluded that there are certain things in the formulation development, the development stage itself, which need to be reviewed or checked into, so that the quality is maintained. So there might be certain gaps during the development. There might be certain shortcuts during the development which is happening in order to file more and more generic products, and therefore they came out with the concept of quality by design. So it's a systematic, holistic, and proactive approach to pharmaceutical development. And it begins with some predefined objectives which are being set by the agency, and emphasizes more on the product as well as the process understanding, the basic knowledge, the scientific knowledge about the product, and the basic knowledge about the process and the process controls. Based on this science behind this and the quality risk management, FDA came out with the guidance which is called ICH Q8. So what is QBD in short? So if you see here, the circle here, so as I said that basically there are two things. You have a product, so you have to have the entire knowledge about your product. So this is the product knowledge. And the other side, it's the process. So it is a process understanding. So there are two things which are intermingled hand in hand. So when you come to understand about the product, so what do you know about the product? So there will be one set of specifications for the product which you need to comply. So this is the product specifications, and the other part is the product quality. So there are certain quality attributes of the product which, if not maintained, the product can fail anytime. So this is the product quality attribute. So product specification and product quality attributes together will give you a desired product performance or a desired clinical performance. And therefore, a proper designing of the product is required for any dosage form, for starting from the choosing of your API to choosing of your excipients, the choosing of your, the stability conditions, everything. So that is the product design. On the other side, if you come across the process part, so from the process understanding, we have two main things. One is, what are the process parameters? So during the manufacturing of the product, what parameters we are going to undertake? It should be simple, it should be doable, and it should be reproducible. So you have the process parameters in place, and in order to make them reproducible, you have to have some process controls. So you have to come out with your control strategy. So this is about the, and then with these things, you can have a better process performance. So you have robustness, you have reproducibility, and this all, and the process design with all the unit operations and the control strategy put together is your quality by design. So this is what FDA expects from you now. So with all these things, you come out with the continuous improvement of your product. So in fact, for the entire product life cycle, you have to go through your continuous improvement of your process or the product quality. So this is called the continuous improvement. So this all put together is your QBD. So the paradigm of QBD, as I said, so what is QBD? So you have QTPP, quality target product profile. So what product profile you want to achieve? CQA is your critical quality attributes. CPP is your critical process parameters. Then you have a design space. After that, you have a DOE, that is design of experiments. You cannot run hundreds and hundreds of experiments for your generic product. So you naturally, you have to come out with a proper design of experiments, so that with minimal number of experiments, you can still say that your product is robust. You have developed a robust product. And finally, the product life cycle, the control strategy, and the risk associated with all these processes. So this is about the entire paradigm of QBD. So if we go back again to the traditional versus the QBD based system. So traditionally what we were doing previously, when we starting from 2000 onwards, like we have a product system where we develop, you do a product development, the FND does a product development, we have a fixed batch manufacturing process to be done, a fixed packaging process to be taken care of, and a product distribution. And what quality system or the quality assurance is to do? We used to have a fixed process parameters or fixed parameters or ranges for the product, in process testing and documentation, and finally the release of the product. So this was all about the traditional system. In spite of following all these things, we had market complaints. We cannot reproduce our products properly. In many of the cases, we get issues in manufacturing. We get patient complaints. We get recalls from the market because of many different quality issues. So therefore, the present system now is to develop a product, you have to have a responsive manufacturing process, a responsive packaging process, and a product distribution. So what do you mean by a responsive packaging process? So the quality system now says that you have to create your own design space. So you have to know within which boundary you, even if you fall in till which boundary your product would be still stable or still complying, and your product will be reproducible. So that is the design space which you need to develop. And so what do you, how do you develop that? So you have to have your own control strategies identified. You have to have probably a PAT-based system. What is a PAT-based system? It's a pharmaceutical analytical technology, that is online testing. Whenever your product is running in a machine, you have to have many online testing for each and every unit of the product to say that every unit of your product is complying. So that is a PAT-based system. It's a laser-based system, sometimes a Raman-based system. So all those things are coming under the PAT-based systems. So, and finally, you have a real-time release. So this is all about the present system which we are following. So the risk-based concepts and the principles which FDA expects from us nowadays. So we have 3 different guidances to follow. So the ICH, you know, ICH is the International Harmonization Conference of Harmonization, which has many guidances, and now the latest ones which we have are ICH Q8, ICH Q9, and ICH Q10. So these 3 guidances are now very important for us to go ahead with the ANDA application. So what does these 3 guidances say? So ICH Q8 has given us an entire overview of a pharmaceutical development of any type of dosage form. So in the past, we used to only transfer a data or the variable output. And at present, what they want us to do is transfer the knowledge. So we had to transfer the entire knowledge. As FND, as analytical team, we have to transfer the entire knowledge to the manufacturing team for them to understand how critical is your product. So suppose your product is light sensitive. So you have to transfer that knowledge to the manufacturing team for them to understand how they need to handle this product so that they can save it or protect it from light. So that is how FDA is telling that instead of transferring the data that it is light sensitive, you have to also provide them with the knowledge that how you can protect it from light. So this is all, this is about the knowledge transfer. Then comes ICH Q9. So it is quality risk management. Initially, people never knew about what is called risk management. So the new concept about risk management is something that FDA wants us to assess that in your entire product development or in, for your product, for your molecule or for your process, you yourself need to identify what are the risks. So, and you need to, beforehand, you have to tell that these are the risks in my process, and therefore, if anything goes wrong, these are the ways which I can mitigate. So this is about ICH Q9. And what is ICH Q10? It is about the entire pharmaceutical quality system. In the past, you had only the GMP checklist, whereas in the present, you have to cover from the quality systems across, from the time you are taking an exhibit batch till the end of the product life cycle. So the pharmaceutical quality system will cover the entire boundary of the product till the product life cycle. So these are the incremental steps which has happened from ICH Q8 to Q9 to Q10. So ICH Q8, if you see the flow chart here, so it is like you are supposed to know about the product profile, the quality target product profile, which you want to mimic, the quality attributes, the critical quality attributes which the product has to have, the risk assessment which you need to do, then the design space creation within which boundary you are comfortable to play with the product, the control strategies which should be a part of your BMR, and the continual improvement for the product life cycle. So this is, in short, everything about the ICH Q8. So now, how does these three parameters intermingle with each other? So in Q8, we have discussed about the design space creation. So for the design space, you have the process parameters, you have the materials in place, and finally the manufacturing facilities. So all three are covered under your design of Q8. And then Q10 is your manufacturing, distribution, and finally it goes to the patient. And to bridge these two things, you have to have the risk assessment done, the quality risk assessment, which is called the Q9 or the risk management program. So this will bridge between the development of your product and till it goes to the patient. So this is bridged by Q9. So because you must be aware that FDA is always concerned about the safety of the product, safety for the patient. So that is the prime importance, and therefore risk management is a very, very major and critical phenomenon which has come across in the current situation. So just to give you some more background about the risk assessment part. So you have three development programs here. So first part is the process development. The second part is the control strategy development, and the third part is your continual product development. So when you say about the process development, so you have to first, during your process development, you have to assess the risk. So during the risk assessment, you have to first identify the risk, then you have to analyze the risk, and then you have to evaluate the risk. So these are the three parameters of your risk assessment. So once you are through with these three things, then when you have enough knowledge about the risk identification and the evaluation part, then you go to the next stage of risk control. How can you control those risks? How can you reduce those risks? And how can you make it accepted? The risk is accepted. So that is about the risk control. And from that, you come to the outcome of the final quality risk management process. So there comes the role of the QA, wherein the continual product development takes place through various review events when your product is already in the market, when you have many batches which are commercialized, and still you have some product complaints here and there, some patient complaints here and there, and therefore the review events, the information from all these review events are being compiled, and then there is a next step of continual product development, which is again relooked into redevelopment or redoing the product so that you have a better product for future. So from ICH Q8 to ICH Q10, I already said that this is the design space and the process step, and finally the controls. So if you see in the graph here, if you see the sharp peak, so once you do all this, once you have all the controls in place, you have a reduced product variability. So this sharp peak tells that initially this wider peak tells that you had a wide variable product and the product would have failed any time of manufacturing. But now within this sharp peak, if you are lying within this peak, there is no you can be 100% sure that your product will never fail. So this is all about your design space and the quality control strategy. So ICH Q10, the concept for this, so pharmaceutical development followed by the technology transfer. Technology transfer goes to the commercial level of commercial manufacturing, and a product may be discontinued, or you may redo the product to make it a better product with all the investigational aspects, with all the reviews, with all the market complaints. So you have a product life cycle development. So the management systems, the risk management systems and the pharmaceutical management systems. So here what you have is your corrective action, your preventive action, the change management system, and the management review. So with all this, you go to the next level of quality improvement. So the enablers here is you have to have a knowledge management and a quality risk management. And then only you can have a properly developed product. So continual improvement, I have already explained to you. So this is the requirement, this is the need of the hour for all the products which are already in the market, very old products. In many of the cases, we have many teething issues which come in our during the manufacturing process. There are many machines which are very old and therefore they are discarded when the new machines come in. So there is a change in the the principle of mechanism, and therefore a product which was manufactured once in a very different type of machinery would now have to be developed in a new machinery, which is the new a new machine which comes into the plant, and therefore you have to find now be converted or developed for to be compatible with the new machine. So there is a continual improvement program which is happening for the product life cycle development. So there will be a forward feedback, a backward feedback mechanism, and therefore we come out with the best product in the market as and when time goes. So just to give you the overview, like what do we understand by QTPP? So in short, there may be many QTPPs for a product, but for a simple conventional injectable product, I have just given you examples here. Selection of QTPP. So this is a dosage form. So whether it's a liquid dosage form, whether it's a lyophilized dosage form, whether it's a suspension, whether it's a emulsion, whether it's a liposomal type of dosage form. So this is the dosage form. The strength of the product. The route of administration, whether it will be given by IV, whether it will be given as an IM, or whether it will be given as any subcutaneous route. So it is the route of administration. Then the therapeutic category, whether it's an oncology product, whether it's a antibiotic, whether it is any other category. So that basic information is required as QTPP. And then the indication. So all these QTPPs would have to be similar as the same as the RLD, that is the reference listed product. When you come for the selection of the CQS, that is critical quality attributes. So you have the assay, the related substances, pH, osmolality, sterility, BET, dissolution, just to name a few. You might have many other CQS can be to be selected for your product, but these are the basic ones which I have captured here. What is the CMA? So these are the critical material attributes. So these are basically to be identified for the API which you are selecting or the excipients which you are selecting, In many cases, the excipients are as critical as your API, so they are very critical needs for the excipient, proper selection or grade of the excipient to be selected, and therefore it is very important. A grade of excipient can change your entire product profile. So it is very important that your selection of API and excipient has to be very robust, and therefore the CMA, the critical material attributes, need to be identified. So you have to have a proper CMA for assay, RS, solubility, identification, polymorphism, just to name a few. You can have many more included in your CMA. Then you need to go do a risk assessment with all your CQAs and CMAs in place. So there can be a high risk, a medium risk, or a low risk. You select your critical process parameters. I have just listed down some of the process parameters like the mixing time, stirring time, filtration, filling time, degassing. So you can have many other CPPs which are needed for your product manufacturing. So once you identify all the CQAs, CMAs, and the CPPs, you can do a table like this, wherein the unit operations, that is the CPPs, are mentioned. Like suppose a conventional injectable product will have a water collection and nitrogen spurging done in that to maintain the dissolved oxygen content. So you can have that as a CPP. You can have the mixing or stirring time, the cooling of the solution, the filtration, filling, sealing, terminal sterilization, visual inspection. So all of them can be your unit operations as CPP. And what you have the other side is the drug product CQA. That is the most important quality attribute which shows that your product is stable. So you can list here the assay, the related substances, and pH, or you can have many others in place. So how does your assay and what of a injection behave, whether there is a low risk or a high risk? So now you note down which are the which are the parameters which can have a high risk for your assay of the product. So the mixing time, if you mix more or mix less, the assay can be changed. You can have a different assay, so that can become your high risk operation. So like that, you have to list down all your high, low, and medium risk for your product. Then what do? Now you have to see how scientifically you can mitigate the high risk to a medium risk and a medium risk to a low risk. Now, if you see here, like you have certain high risks, like probably the terminal sterilization, which is high. So if you have to mitigate that risk, you have to either give an alternate method for your process, or you have to see how the terminal sterilization can be taken care so that it becomes a low risk to your product. So you have to consider that all the high risks are changed into a low risk parameter. So all these unit operations and the knowledge behind them to mitigate that risk has to be transferred from formulation development to the manufacturing team. Then only you can have all the high risk converted to the low risk. So in short, if you see this interface, now the green box at the center, so this is actually the acceptable range for you, and you have the green circle here, which is the design space which you are providing. So it is the outer boundary within which you have established your data, that if you go from this square to the round circle, still your product will be complying comfortably with your specification. And if your product is lying in box, so every time you can say with 100% confidence that your product will be 100% reproducible and there would not be any batch failures to your product. So this is the entire concept of the control strategies, the CPPs, the design space, and the acceptable range. So what is the essence of QBD then? So you have a higher level of assurance for the product quality, which is delivered to the patient. So this is the agency's prime requirement, that you have to assure that the safety of the patient is maintained. So that's the most important essence of QBD. Cost saving and increased efficiency for the industry. Why cost saving? Because in spite of doing so much of activities, you are still giving it as a generic product, and therefore you are saving cost. You are saving a huge cost for the patient. However, by doing this QBD, you will still have an increased efficiency for the industry, because you will have less failures, you will have less recalls, you will have less market complaints, and the patient will be always, will be happy to accept your product. So this is how the QBD will play a critical role for your development. You have less number of market complaints or recalls, and you have more efficient regulatory oversight. So these are the essence of QBD. So now if I have to summarize, what is the role of formulation development? So if I have to summarize, what is the role of formulation development? So F&D plays a very pivotal role to bring a new drug to market in a very smooth and successful and cost-effective manner. F&D is the direct contact point between all cross-functional teams to drive the development, to launch the product, and also do the lifecycle management for any new product or even the old products which are already there in the market. We come out with a robust formulation which yields lesser manufacturing or market complaints and increase the profit margin of the company. And finally, a pool of highly talented formulation development scientists is always a boon to the organization. So with this, thank you. So I have completed my presentation. I think you might have understood most of the aspects.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for delivering such a wonderful session and giving us a very good information about what is ANDA, Hatch-Waxman, and what are injectables.
Sorry, I'm not able to hear any of you. There are some concerns here.
And how
I'm not
advanced
able to understand what you are telling. There might be questions. Listen to any question. But if you have any question, you might send emails. I would try
Dr.
to
Sangeet
answer
here. Am I audible to you?
all of them. I'm really sorry. I'm not able to hear. Hardik, I think I can see you in the screen, but I'm not able to hear anything from the other side.
The questions that our participants have asked will be relayed by Hardik Satri, ma'am, in a short time.
Not able to hear. Okay. Okay. No, I didn't understand. What is the difference between risk? Okay. So, okay. Let me first. See, DOE is basically when you have to have the various experiments done during your lab scale development. So you have to do your compatibility study. You have to choose your actual manufacturing process, whether it will be a terminally sterilized product, whether it will be a only filtered based product, or the various, to develop the suspension product, the various particle size which you need to monitor to finally freeze your specifications. So there will be number of experiments which you need to perform, because it will be interrelated. It can be, there are certain, like if you change your particle size, your dissolution may go up or it may go down. So there are various factors which play into role, and therefore when you choose your design of experiments, it has to be done so robustly that with a lesser number of experiments you are able to come out with a proper product specification. But when we talk about the risk assessment here are the critical, finally when you are done with all your design of experiments, the final stage is your risk assessment stage, because you have already identified your critical process parameters. you have identified all your control strategies, you have identified all types of critical material attributes. Now to finally come out with like how your product behaves with all those factors, because you have already done all those things in your design of experiments. That is all completed. Now you think about you are going to the final stage or scaling it up in your manufacturing facility. So now it is a completely different setup. So you have to understand now your product with respect to your manufacturing facility. So there are many unforeseen issues which may come with respect to the manufacturing machineries which are there in your plant, the environment which you find in your plant. So all those things are your risk now. So now with all your critical material attributes, critical process parameters which you have already identified, from there you have to find out what is the risk in your product with from your process per se, as well as from your product per se. From your product means your product knowledge per se, that's the product specification, your assay, whatever quality target product profile you have finally chosen. So from that you have to understand what may go wrong in your product when you scale it up at a very high scale in your manufacturing unit. So that is what FDA wants. So the risk assessment is totally different, your DOE is totally different. Could I have, did I give you a proper, hello? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. See, biosimilars are a different category altogether. So what I talk about the generic product is only a small molecule. It is, they are considered as small molecules, and biological products are all big molecules. Big molecules in the sense peptides and proteins. Anything which a protein which has more than 40 amino acid is called a biological product. So whenever you are doing a generic to that biological product is called a biosimilar product. Okay, and whatever you are doing for the small chemical entities for ours, these are called small molecules. So the generic of these small molecules are called the normal generic ANDAs. So a biosimilar is only for the biological generics for the biological products, while the generic products for the small chemical entities. So the filing, as I said, probably I would touch base on that also. See, for ANDA filings, we usually go through CDER process, where CDER is a separate, from in 21 CFR, if you go in the US FDA guidance, 21 CFR, it is a CDER. That is where we submit. Whereas for the biological products, it is CBER. It is for the biologicals. So there are two different segments. So the CDER people doesn't review anything for CDER, and the CDER people doesn't review anything for CBER. So these are two different things. Okay. Hello. Yeah, tell me. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So innovator sample, as I said, that our generic product development itself starts with the innovator sample. So innovator is when you, you must be aware that there is something called the Orange Book. Okay. In FDA's database, if you go, there is something called Orange Book. The Orange Book will list all the innovator products. The first NC which is launched will be called as a reference listed drug. So it is a RLD, which we call as RLD. And that is what we need to actually copy. So naturally, you have to get the innovator product, you have to procure the innovator product at your site to first characterize that. Unless and until you characterize that, you cannot come out with your product profile or your product specification. There are certain cases where the product may be pharmacopoeial. So if it is pharmacopoeial, we are fine. You know what should be the specification of the product. But if your product is non-pharmacopoeial, so you have to rely everything on the reference listed drug. whenever you go for an ANDA submission, the reference product listing is a must. Without that, there will be an RTR. So you will get a refuse to file for that submission. So you have to procure your RLD, and there's a process for that. You have to apply for certain licenses, and based on the license application only, we can procure the innovator product in our company only for testing and other parameters, not for any human use. However, if you need to do some bio study, if you need to do some clinical study, which should run in parallel with your test or generic product, you can have a license for that separately, that it would be used for some clinical trials. So there is a process for that. We have to apply licenses, and then only we can get an innovator product in place. Thank you. Hello? Hi, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So when we say that a product is bioequivalent, means that it's not that it has to be 100% similar. So there is a, hello?
Yes, audible, madam.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, it got lost, I think. It's getting ready once again.
You will just, if possible, connect once again, so we can.
Yeah, I'm trying to connect. Yeah, let me see. Have I got connected?
1 minute, ma'am.
Can you hear?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, ma'am, it's audible.
Okay. Yeah, so it is not that it can be 100% equivalent. So there is a criteria, there is an acceptance criteria. So there is a range to that. You have to follow. But there are some product specific guidances provided. So you have to exactly be at par with the FDA guidance which is being provided. So even FDA knows that your products cannot be 100% same as your innovative product. So you have to fall within that range. So it is not that in most of the complex products like the peptide based products, or the liposomal products, or any type of microspheres, or all the systems and all. So you have to be within the acceptance criteria. So that is what FDA wants. So you can go through any product specific guidance which is being published by FDA, and nowadays FDA has come out with many guidances, and in future also they will try to cover all the product specific guidances as much as possible.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for responding to all our queries, and thank you for delivering such an informative and wonderful session. Once again, on behalf of Anand Pharmacy College, we'll thank you. We can